The kitchen clock ticked louder than usual, counting down to something neither of them could name. The air was heavy with silence, that tense kind that always came when Lance was home. Late sunlight poured through the high windows, gold against the marble. Jada balanced on the edge of a narrow stool, arms stretched up toward the top shelf. The cereal box, hers, waited there, unreachable. Of course it was. He'd put it there, again. Behind her came that familiar sound. His voice slid into the quiet like the slow drag of a knife. Deep, steady, cruelly amused. You ever heard of asking for help instead of climbing like a child? Morning sunlight spilled through the long kitchen windows, painting neat rectangles across the tile. Lance stood at the counter, his movements deliberate, almost methodical. He twisted the lid on a jar of guava jam until the seal squeaked. Then another. Peanut butter. His palm pressing down, forearm flexing. One by one, he tightened them all. Honey, sauce, anything she used. There was nothing dramatic about it. Just quiet revenge. When he was done, he wiped his hands on a dish towel, leaving the jars like a row of locked safes. His gaze drifted toward the empty doorway, listening. He wanted to hear her footsteps, the soft shuffle that always came before her hesitant good morning. He didn't know why he waited for it. A moment later, she appeared, notebook in one hand, hair pinned up in a bundle of thick, perfectly maintained dreadlocks. She looked out of place in the sterile brightness of his mother's house, like color in a room meant for grayscale. She offered a polite smile. Morning. He didn't answer. He watched her instead. Watched the way she moved to the cabinet, how she had to stretch to reach a glass, how she hesitated before asking for help. When she finally reached for the jam, he waited for the sound, the soft click-click of her trying to open it, the growing frustration. Her brow furrowed. Why are these all so... She stopped when she realized he was still there, leaning against the counter. Tight? He finished for her, voice low. Maybe you're just not strong enough for country living. Her lips pressed together, forming a thin line. She set the jar down with more force than necessary and turned to the toaster instead. Country living? We're in Kingston, she muttered. He smirked. Then city weakness. Same thing. Amara inhaled slowly. She had promised herself she wouldn't react. Every time she gave him a rise, he seemed to enjoy it. She buttered her bread with careful precision, the knife clinking against the plate. When she didn't answer, he added, almost lazily, maybe those heavy dreadlocks are draining the oxygen from your brain. You looked confused yesterday when I asked you a simple question. The knife paused mid-spread. She didn't look at him, didn't say a word. Instead, she folded her toast, bit into it, and walked out to the veranda. Hours later, when she returned from the small shop down the road, the front door creaked open, and there he was again, coming from the opposite direction. They almost collided in the doorway. He didn't step aside. His voice came low, steady, almost calm. You shouldn't be here. Jada blinked, her fingers tightening around the grocery bag. Excuse me? He tilted his head slightly, eyes unreadable. You heard me. You don't belong here. Then he walked past her, leaving the words hanging between them like a draft of cold air. She stood in the doorway, heart thudding, telling herself, again, that she wouldn't call her mother, wouldn't cry, wouldn't give him that power. If her mother needed time to rebuild, then Jada could be strong enough to wait. He could keep twisting lids, hiding things, trying to shrink her down. She would not shrink. When the door clicked shut behind him, she exhaled, straightened her shoulders, and carried the groceries to the kitchen, quiet defiance in every step. By the third week, the house had learned their rhythm. Mary's laughter filled it when she was home, but the moment her car left the driveway, The air between Jada and Lance turned brittle. He found new ways to test her, turning down the water heater before her morning bath, using her favorite mug, then leaving it on the counter, half full of cold coffee, folding her laundry but slipping one damp shirt back into the drawer so it would sour overnight. None of it loud enough to accuse, just enough to remind her that this wasn't her place. Jada noticed every small act, tucked each one into the quiet ledger she kept behind her eyes. She never confronted him. Instead, she grew precise, stacking dishes exactly, labeling her groceries, keeping her distance. Sometimes she caught him watching her, not with warmth, not quite with hate, something sharper, like curiosity that embarrassed them both. He would look away first, jaw set, as if he'd caught himself remembering that she was human. Once, on a rainy afternoon, she came in from the veranda with wet hair, drops sliding down her shoulders. Lance looked up from the couch, remote in hand, expression unreadable. Neither spoke. The only sound was the rain against the windows and the television's low hum. She passed behind him, the scent of rain and coconut oil trailing close enough to touch. He didn't turn his head, but his grip on the remote tightened until the plastic creaked. Jada kept walking. That night, she wrote a letter she would never send to her mother, about how strong she was being, how she wasn't going to give in. Then she folded it and hid it in her dresser drawer. Down the hall, Lance stared at the photograph of his younger brother on his desk. He told himself the irritation he felt toward the girl wasn't guilt, or envy, or anything soft. Just order. He needed the house to stay the way it was. By morning, both had decided to pretend nothing had happened, but the tension lingered, like the taste of rain left in the air, ready to break the next time they shared the same room. The kitchen clock ticked louder than usual, counting down to something neither of them could name. The air was heavy with silence, that tense kind that always came when Lance was home. Late sunlight poured through the high windows, gold against the marble. Jada balanced on the edge of a narrow stool, arms stretched up toward the top shelf. The cereal box, hers, waited there, unreachable. Of course it was. He'd put it there, again. Behind her came that familiar sound. His voice slid into the quiet like the slow drag of a knife. Deep, steady, cruelly amused. You ever heard of asking for help instead of climbing like a child? His tone was lazy, but his eyes weren't. She froze for a second, fingers still reaching, and turned her head just enough to see him leaning against the doorway. All height and stillness, like a shadow that had learned to smirk. The kind of look that said he enjoyed this. From where he stood, she looked small. Smaller than anyone had the right to be in his mother's kitchen. Every inch of her screamed softness, the curve of her cheeks, the smooth, unmarked skin that looked untouched by anything real. Even her dreadlocks, woolly, neat, well cared for, made him think of people who'd never had to fight for a thing. Spoiled, sheltered, easy. And here she was, taking up space that wasn't hers, taking what he'd kept untouched. Jada's spine stiffened, though she didn't turn to face him. His voice always had that effect, too close, too deep, threading right under her skin. Her chest tightened. Still, she refused to let him see how much his presence rattled her. You ever heard of not hiding people's food like a bully? She shot back. That made him laugh, a single dark sound that seemed to fill the room. You're lucky my mom doesn't see how ungrateful you are, he said. She finally glanced back at him then, and his amusement hit a wall of quiet fire in her eyes. And you're lucky she doesn't see how cruel you can be. He froze for a heartbeat. Behind her, on the counter, a photograph caught his eye. His little brother grinning in a baseball cap, forever 9 years old. Something flickered through him, something jagged, private, and he turned away before she could see it. Watch that you don't fall and break something, princess, he hissed tightly. He left the kitchen with that last word hanging in the air like smoke. She heard his footsteps fade down the hall, the dull thud of the couch, then the sudden roar of the TV, the big screen he'd claimed all week, even though he knew it was her turn today. From the living room, his satisfaction poured out like heat. Quiet, deliberate triumph. Jada exhaled. Her heart pounded, a mix of fury and humiliation burning under her ribs. She hated him. His height, used like a weapon. His skin, dark and sun-deep, like he'd spent the day working under real heat instead of idling in luxury. Muscles like a laborer, attitude like a king. He didn't lift a finger for anyone, yet somehow he thought her presence was the problem. She turned back to the shelf, jaw set. He wasn't going to win tonight. Her fingers brushed the edge of the shelf. Almost there. She rose on her toes, stretching until the stool trembled beneath her. "Come on," she whispered. Then it happened. The stool shifted, slipped out from under her feet, the world tilting violently. A gasp. Then a crash that split the silence, a thunderclap of splintered wood and shattering glass. Pain flared up her leg, white and instant. The cereal scattered across the white tiles. She fell hard, clutching her ankle, a cry breaking from her throat. The TV went quiet. Then footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Lance burst back through the doorway, breath-ragged eyes wide, the first real expression that wasn't disdain. For a split second, the sight of her on the floor, crying, trembling, her ankle bent wrong, tore something open in his chest. He dropped to one knee beside her. His hands hovered, unsure. Don't touch me," Jada cried out through the pain, but he was already moving. His arms slid beneath her with practiced strength, lifting her off the floor. She gasped, the sound raw, small, her hand clutching at his shirt, a reflex to cope with the shot of new pain through her ankle. He froze when she whimpered, a muscle ticking in his jaw, then held her tighter. Her cheek pressed against his chest, the scent of cedar and clean cotton filling her lungs. His heartbeat was hard, uneven. For one long moment, neither of them moved. He should have set her down, should have called for help. Instead, his eyes caught hers. Close now, too close. And the air between them changed. He froze, the sound of her breathing caught in the space between them. Her lashes were wet, her eyes wide and bright with tears that made them seem even larger, the gloss of pain softening every edge of her face. For a heartbeat, he couldn't look away. Then she winced, a small, involuntary sound, and her eyes squeezed shut, another tear slipping down her cheek. The sight broke whatever spell had held him. With a sharp exhale, he looked away, shifted her in his arms, and carried her out of the kitchen, each step slow, guilt pressing heavier than her weight. Behind them, the photo on the counter watched in silence. The cereal lay scattered like pale dust, a small wreckage left in their wake. Evening bled through the windows when Lance wheeled Jada back into the house. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain. He pushed the chair down the hall without a word, every movement careful, almost formal. At her doorway, he paused. "Let me help you in," he said, voice low. Jada hesitated, then nodded once. He lifted her again. She felt the strain in his arms, the heat of his breath. He carried her to the bed, setting her down as if the slightest weight might break her all over again. "Thank you," she whispered. "You can go now." But something he didn't expect. His breath caught. For the first time, the silence between them felt charged. He was close enough to see the tremor in her lashes, to feel the warmth of her breath. Something inside him pulled closer still before he even understood it, the air tightening until a single breath might have closed the distance. Then her eyes flickered, startled, clear, and the spell snapped. His jaw tightened. breath sharp in his chest as she flinched from the same shiver of recognition, then straightened, retreating. "Get out," she whispered, the words trembling between warning and ache. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. His jaw flexed, his eyes unreadable. Then he turned, walked out, and let the door slam behind him, too loud, too fast. The sound jolted through her chest. She snatched a pillow and threw it at the door. The soft thud was the only answer. Downstairs, Lance stopped midway on the last step. The muffled hit reached him. So did the silence that followed. He sank onto the couch, anger cooling into something heavier. He told himself to forget it. Instead, his mind replayed every second, the feel of her weight when he carried her, light and fragile like a bird trying not to tremble. He'd touched her twice now, twice too many. He rubbed his palms against his knees as if he could erase the memory. What was I thinking? He wasn't supposed to know what her skin felt like through that hospital blanket, how small her hands looked against his shirt. He'd been cruel, yes, but never reckless. Now he couldn't stop thinking about it. He pressed his knuckles to his temples. I'm not the villain here. None of this had been his choice. No one had asked him before moving a stranger into that room. His mother should have known better. She knew what that room meant, what promise had died there. It wasn't the girl's fault, but she was the only one left to carry it. He stared at the dark TV screen until his reflection blurred. The house creaked above him, but no sound came from her room. No crying, no movement. The longer the silence stretched, the tighter his chest grew. Upstairs, Jada lay motionless on the bed. Every shift sent fire through her ankle, so she stayed still, staring at the ceiling. The lamp threw a soft circle of light across the floor. Her painkillers sat on the dresser, just out of reach. She counted the distance in inches, in breaths, in the stubborn pride that kept her from calling his name. She would not ask him for help. The ache sharpened, tears gathered but didn't fall. He did this, she thought. If he hadn't hidden the cereal, if he hadn't... She stopped herself. Blaming him wouldn't change anything. In the hospital, she'd almost told his mother whose fault it was. The words had sat on her tongue, waiting. But when she'd seen his mother's worried face, she couldn't speak them. She didn't know why. Now, in the quiet of her borrowed room, she knew one thing clearly. She was done. He'd won. The fight had drained out of her. Tomorrow, she would call her mother. She would go home. Outside, the rain began again, soft against the roof. Two people under the same sound, each pretending not to listen for the other. Jada was 18 when her mother sent her away. It wasn't punishment, it was survival. Her mother's business had collapsed, and money had run out faster than pride could rebuild it. So she reached out to her oldest friend, Mary Grant, a successful businesswoman who lived in a quiet, well-kept house miles away from the city noise. Mary agreed to take Jada in until things steadied at home. For Jada, it was supposed to be temporary. A few months, maybe a school term. She didn't expect the house to feel so different, too quiet, too large, filled with the scent of furniture polish and the faint echo of a family that didn't quite exist anymore. Mary's son, Lance, was 19. Tall, athletic, handsome in the way that always drew attention, and cold in the way that made people keep their distance. He didn't like Jada from the moment she arrived. She hadn't done anything to him. She simply stepped into the wrong room, the one that had belonged to his younger brother. The brother had died a year earlier, hit by a car while running from bullies. Lance had been there, promising him in the hospital that he'd be fine. He hadn't been. The guilt of that day had sunk into Lance's bones. Keeping the bedroom untouched was his way of keeping the memory alive, his way of pretending that the world had stopped where he left it. Then Jada arrived, a stranger unpacking her life into the one space he refused to let change. Her presence was an offense he couldn't forgive, so he found small ways to punish her, tightening the lids on jars, hiding the things she liked, mocking her hair, her voice, her very existence in the house. Mary worked long hours and missed most of it. To her, Lance and Jada were just learning to live together. To Jada, every day was a test of patience. She told herself she'd stay strong, give her mother time to rebuild, and never let Lance see her break. But the tension grew, unspoken and steady, until one careless moment, a fall, a broken ankle, and the first crack in the wall between them. From that day, everything shifted. The guilt, the silence, the reluctant care. It all began to blur into something neither of them could name. Not friendship, not forgiveness, not yet love. Just two people, trapped by circumstance, learning how much damage and tenderness could live in the same house.